the Happy Scientist podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happyscientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello and welcome to the Happy Scientist podcast from Bitesize Bio. If you want to become a happier, healthier and more productive scientist, you are in the right place. I'm Nick Oswald, the founder of bitesizebio.com, and with me is the driving force of this podcast, the never disappointing Kenneth Vogt, my friend, mentor and the founder of the coaching company Vera Claritas. Today's episode is called How to Handle Disappointment. That is a big one, Ken. What have you got to say about that?
Yes, it is. And before we get started, I've got to do something I haven't had to do before. I need to make a correction about our last episode. I made a factual error. It didn't impact the point, but I care about the facts, like all you good scientists do. So I was talking about Jim Thorpe, an Olympic athlete, and I said that he had been at the Olympics in Germany right before World War II, but I was collapsing him with Jesse Owens, the African-American Olympic athlete who messed up Hitler real bad by not being Aryan and yet winning everything at Nuremberg in 1936. But Jim Thorpe was actually at the 1912 Olympics before World War I in Stockholm. But he still did his practicing in a lounge chair on the deck of the boat. He in his head. So that was my main point. So foster imagination, like Jim Thorpe.
So that was disappointing that you got that wrong, Ken. How do we handle that?
Well, that's it. We'll talk about that in quite the detail today. Because disappointment is definitely something that you're going to face, especially if you've been using a lot of imagination, because sometimes you can take your imagination beyond a point that you can turn into reality, and you just don't get what you hope for. And now here we are telling you to be imaginative. Now, are we setting you up for disappointment? Well, perhaps. However, disappointment doesn't have to be this horror story that it is for a lot of people. For some folks, disappointment is about the worst thing that could possibly happen to them. And the thing about disappointment that you have to keep in mind is that disappointment is a choice. And it's not a terribly productive choice. And now you're thinking, how could it be a choice? I would never, foist this upon myself. It's such a horrible feeling. I just hate it. But no, it came down to what expectations that you had and what you think is the story about what happens when your expectations are not met. So let's unpack this a bit. So first we got to look at what is it that you might be disappointed in, because there are several factors, and if you don't tease them apart, you may not realize what the source really is. So for instance, you might be disappointed in the circumstances of something that happens. In other words, it just didn't go the way you wanted it to. It might have actually come out like you had hoped, or at least come out well enough, and but it didn't go the way you wanted. That's one possible disappointment. Another might be is you didn't get the result you wanted. Your outcome wasn't there. Maybe everything did go fine and as far as the process, but it didn't end up the way you wanted. Another possibility with disappointment may be that, look, we had everything set to go perfect, but these other people just didn't do their part. They didn't do their job. They didn't show up on time. Whatever it is, you had everything ready to go perfect and get the perfect outcome, but other people messed it up for you. And then finally, and this is the one that is the hardest on people, is maybe you're disappointed in yourself. Like, everything was there, everything was good to go, and I just didn't deliver. I didn't step up. I didn't show up fully. I wasn't completely engaged. And so These are all possibilities for why you're disappointed. So if you think about this, like, man, I should be disappointed all the time. Because circumstances, outcomes, other people, and even myself getting something wrong, wow, that's just a common occurrence, right? So if you look at the world this way, you're going to be disappointed all the time. And it really comes down to, what kind of expectations do you have for all of these things? And how did you determine your expectations? So, where did you set the bar? Now, I'm not advocating that you should set the bar low or that you should have sloppy standards. That's not the point here. But sometimes we set expectations that aren't realistic. And when I say unrealistic, I don't mean just that they don't align with some current view or some, or worse yet, some political view. What I mean is that they don't tie up to the facts that you're aware of, things that you know. And oftentimes you can head off a disappointment by seeing it coming. When you realize, I got this person on this task, and man, they're swamped right now, and there's a high likelihood they're not going to get this done on time, and maybe I need to take other steps. Well, you can head off that disappointment. You can get around it. Or here's an outcome that's a real moonshot, and I'm not going to count on that outcome. I might like that, but I'm not going to count on it. I'm not going to build things on an outcome that is unlikely to happen. You have some control over this. So that's part of the reason we end up in disappointment, is because we don't properly assess from the beginning what's available to us, and even asking too much of ourselves sometimes. And in this podcast, I'm often advocating that you should ask a lot of yourself, that you should dig deep, that you should make an extra effort. But there is a human limit, and there's a limit for each of us at any given moment. And it doesn't matter if the person at the next bench can do this easily and it's hard for you. If it's hard for you today, it's hard for you today. Now, you might want to do something about that. You might want to get more proficient at something, or maybe you need more information, or maybe you need more support, or maybe you need better supplies or better equipment. Well, okay, take those steps, but don't just be disappointed in yourself purely because those other circumstances aren't there, if you're aware of those circumstances. Now, I mean, we all have those situations where you go into something and you got that kit, and I've heard good things about this kit. It's great. I've never used it before, but I think it'll be fine. And you use it, and it just isn't what you'd hope for. Okay, that happens. So that'd be a moment where maybe you would be disappointed, and you might feel justified. Like, well, I'm entirely allowed to be disappointed right now because things weren't the way I expected, and I did set my expectations properly. I did seek advice, and I did check into things first. And poor pitiful me, I've got a bad result. So here's a question to ask yourself at a moment like that. What are you getting out of being disappointed? So I'll put that to you, Nick. I'm sure you've been disappointed in the past. What have you ever got out of being disappointed?
Well, that's a good question. I guess that that's always a really hard question to ask, isn't it? Is yourself, is what do I get out of this? Because you think you don't get anything out of it. It's happening to you. But I guess one thing you get out of being disappointed is that you get to feel sorry for yourself, and that kind of, in a strange way, feels good, or it absolves you of responsibility, or all that sorts of things that those kind of feelings do.
Right. And understand, everybody, I've asked this kind of question of Nick many a time, so he was prepared for this question. You might have been sitting there going, what do I get out of disappointment? I don't get anything out of it. I hate it,
I've been whipped into submission by you, Ken, that I have to answer that question in a proper way. So over the years.
I love it. But here's the thing, and this is something that's really, really worth internalizing. Whenever you are feeling bad in any way, Disappointment is just one of the ways. Ask yourself the question, what am I getting out of this? And don't allow yourself to say, I'm not getting anything out of this. I hate this. This is awful. It's the worst. I'd do anything to avoid this. Like, well, apparently you won't do anything to avoid it because you didn't avoid it this time. And sometimes it's like, well, when you say do anything to avoid it, well, I mean, it might mean you'd have to quit your job to avoid this, this particular disappointment. It might mean you'd have to fire somebody. It might mean that you'd have to refuse to do a certain task. Things with consequences. I'm not saying these are insignificant things, but you do have a choice. And at some point you can look at it and go, you know what? It is just not worth it. And therefore I'm going to take a different path. And other times you're going to realize, as much as I hate this, it truly is worth it. I'm committed to this. I got to deal with this. And it's funny, when you decide to accept something, you will notice that your disappointment starts to be mitigated. It starts to go away. It starts to be easier to take, because a lot of the things about disappointment are the story you're telling about it, how horrible it all is, and how devastating it is, and how eternally damaging it is. It's all those stories they're being heaped on top of whatever didn't go the way you would like, are what are making it feel so bad. So let's start unwinding this a bit. So you can set yourself up in the beginning for disappointment by not examining things. So let's make sure that you examine your expectations from the beginning. Based on our last episode, of course, we're telling you to be imaginative. We're telling you should be swinging for the fences all the time. Well, if you're going to do that, I promise you things aren't always going to work out the way you had hoped. So it comes down to your expectations now. If you realize that when I go for that really hard one, that I am going to not get there sometimes. When you know that going into it, it changes how you feel about it. Now, I don't want you to set yourself up to well, it didn't matter. I knew this was a moonshot anyway, so who cares? It's not like that. If you're going to go for moonshots, you need to make some moonshots, but you got to understand that you don't make them all, and so it comes down to looking at what you expected. Now, some of the things might be, well, is it that you didn't get what you wanted in entirety, or is it just pieces of it? Like, for instance, is it just a timeline issue? In other words, did it just not happen as quickly as you would like? Because now you know what part to address. Now it's easy to go, is there a way to tinker with this? Can maybe I could put more staffing on it, or perhaps there's some things that could be tightened up so that this could be done more quickly. Did I disregard a hard deadline that now caused a problem? Because sometimes the timeline problem isn't a problem with the individual thing itself. It's about something external to that thing. So you get disappointed with this procedure because it didn't happen fast enough this time, but this time was about something else that caused you to feel that you needed it in a certain time frame. So get clear on time issues, and do they really apply to this thing that's disappointing you right now, or is it something else? Here's what I really want to warn you against, and that's perfectionism. Perfectionism is so caustic, and it's so painful. And in the show notes, I'll have a link to a blog post that was entitled "Perfectionism is Setting the Bar Too Low." And you're like, setting the bar too low? Isn't perfectionism all about setting it absolutely at the pinnacle? And it's like, no, it's not. And I'm not even going to get into the details on that. Go read it yourself. It's a short read. But you'll enjoy it. And the fact is, if you have lived a life as a perfectionist, if that's constantly popped up for you, I promise you, you've been disappointed over and over and over again. And you probably know other people who aren't perfectionists, and wow, they don't have those disappointments. The same things go right and the same things go wrong for them, but they skip the disappointment. It's as simple as stopping being a perfectionist. So, that's something to really look at. Now, the other thing that might happen is that your expectations may be based on inappropriate or even counterproductive comparisons. This didn't go as well as the last time. This didn't go as well as when Sally did it. This didn't go as well as when I had better equipment. You can have a whole list of things that you could compare to that aren't fair comparisons. Well, you can't compare it to when you had better equipment because you don't have better equipment now. You can't compare it to Sally because, she happens to be truly expert at this and you're just trying it for the first time. You can't compare it to the last time you did it because, you'll know why there's a difference that time. Now, I'm not saying you should never make a comparison, but the point is don't make inappropriate comparisons. And don't make comparisons that are just going to tear you down. If you're just constantly comparing yourself to Nikola Tesla, who's got this right, well, boy, you are going to be disappointed a lot, So, what do you put in its place? So you may have a pattern where disappointment shows up for you regularly, and you think, well, I don't know how to do this any different, when something goes wrong, I'm disappointed. Isn't that an appropriate response? That I didn't get what I wanted, so I'm disappointed. Well, you can call it appropriate from the standpoint of, there's nothing morally wrong with you that you're disappointed. However, it is still a choice. You don't have to feel that way. In its place, consider this as an alternative. How about acceptance? You got an outcome and you accept it. What a novel idea. Now, that doesn't mean that you give up. It doesn't mean that you surrender like, surrendering in war here, and that's it, we're now beat down. Acceptance, properly applied, is not just capitulation. Instead, acceptance is steely-eyed realism. You saw the actual result. This is what happened. The past happened. It's done. That experiment failed. That person didn't come through. I didn't properly prepare. I didn't have the things I needed. That's what happened. So the sooner you get there, the sooner you rip off the Band-Aid, the easier it will be to get past any disappointment. Now, here's the thing, too. You can both be disappointed and accept it. In other words, you might be disappointed before you can stop it. It might have already happened. But your way out of disappointment, the way to turn it down or turn it off, is acceptance. That, okay, I see things as they are. The problem here is that if you don't accept results, here's what you get. You end up being pessimistic. You end up being passively aggressive. You end up being moody. And, often this is involuntary. You won't realize you're doing those things until you see yourself doing it. It's like you're watching yourself on stage and you're realizing, oh man, here I go again. All dark and doomy. And now people don't want to work with you. Your boss may be frustrated with you because here's another layer on top of this. There was some kind of failure, and on top of that, we got to deal with this moody person in the lab. This person that needs to be coddled right now. They need some extra personal attention just because they chose to be disappointed. We've all seen situations where something went wrong and you see somebody afterward and they're like, whoa, that wasn't what I expected. And, without any carrying on, without any old woe is me, just like, well, look at that. and don't we find those people a lot easier to get along with? Aren't they more fun to work with? Don't we have more confidence in them? Because they're not going to head down this deep dark hole, waste time, suck energy, and suck the joy out of the room because something went wrong. You don't have to be that person. You can accept what happened and avoid all those negative emotional reactions. Now, of course, anytime something goes wrong, you have a learning opportunity. And here's a truism that might not be fun to hear, but it's so. Pain is a very effective learning tool. And yes, it's painful when something fails. It's painful when you didn't get the result you wanted, or when people didn't come through for you, or you didn't come through for yourself. But you can learn from a circumstance here, and you can ask yourself some questions like, what is one thing I can learn from this? Now, especially if it's been something where you felt disappointment and it was hard for you, don't make yourself go back to school on this. But ask yourself that simple question: what's one thing I can learn from this? Not what's everything I should learn from this. That might be overwhelming, but what's one thing I can learn from this? It's like, okay, I should have listened to Bob when he told me to watch this. I should have been cleaner. I should have gathered my equipment first before I got started. And there could be any number of things. And I'm rattling off things that are simple. It might be something, big and complicated and deep. Something that could be a really valuable learning point. You may realize something that could advance your abilities and potentially advance your career or advance science, because you realize something now that hadn't been noticed before. This is where you learn those things. And how many scientific discoveries do you know of that came out of disaster, that came out of somebody messing something up? And we've referred to some of those before, and I won't reiterate ones that are just old hat, but I'll bet you, dear listener, have had an experience like this yourself, where something went terribly wrong and you really learned something. I could point back to 10 things in my own life about that off the top of my head, and I'm sure, Nick, you could too. We have a lot of possibilities there. So another question you might ask yourself after something goes wrong and could be potentially disappointing is, how can I adjust my course to avoid this disappointment in the future? It's like, all right, I'm going to accept I'm disappointed right now. See, that's another thing too. You don't just have to accept outcomes. You can accept disappointment. But hey, I don't want to be disappointed next time. So how do I head that off? And maybe it's like, it could be like, I gotta get a better night's sleep before a day like today. And maybe it's I need to be more versed on the literature before I dive into something like this. Any number of things that you could look at. But look at, what can I do to adjust my course? And this isn't about making yourself bad. It isn't about making yourself weak or insignificant or insufficient. It's just about noticing what could be improved here that will make this turn out better. And notice I'm saying adjust my course, because yes, of course, there's lots of other things that could be adjusted. But if you start to realize, I can apply it to me. I'm not a bad person because this went wrong. And I can be better, and I will face less disappointment in the future. So if you don't like being disappointed, if you really, really hate it, the answer is going to be to make yourself better. You're involved, and only you can make you better. You can't rely on other people for that. And you can't rely on, I'm going to fix all these other people around me. No, that's their job. Your job is to work on you. Another thing you could look at is just, even if you can't come up with something that you did wrong per se that you need to adjust, just what's one thing I could do differently next time? You maybe don't even know if it'll be better. It's just, well, what else could I try? Well, I thought I could go this way. Maybe I should go that way. So again, be open. Be open to be imaginative about possibilities of changes. Not just you don't just have to fix problems. Sometimes you just have to change. Just do something different. So, all this being said, we each of us have our own experience with things. For some of us, disappointment's just not that bad. It's not that hard. But for some of you, disappointment is terrible. It's a horrible burden. It's almost too much to bear. So, what if that's how you experience things? Well, first off, there's some advice that you may hear sometimes, and I want to warn you against it. It's bad advice. And you probably heard this said, if you never want to be disappointed, just never leave your comfort zone. For some people, that might be a way to live. For a scientist, for a happy scientist, there's no way you could follow that advice. You have to leave your comfort zone. Your comfort zone is where nothing happens. And I'll grant you that all disappointment is outside of your comfort zone. But that's okay, because all opportunity is out there too. And all success is out there too. And all progress is out there too. And if you can latch on to the possibilities, the possibility of progress, the possibility of discovery, and realize how much more valuable that is to you than the occasional disappointment that you encounter while pursuing those things. That's how you can get free of this. When you start to realize that I can avoid disappointment, and I can have disappointment and have it not be that bad, because it's worth it. It's the cost of doing business. And we've all done this. If you like working out at the gym, the adage of no pain, no gain is so true. We go to the gym sometimes and we enjoy the pain. In the past, we might have found that to be similar to disappointment, to have to suffer that. So, a lot of it comes down to perspective. So another thing to look at then, they're like, well, yeah, but this disappointment has been so overwhelming to me. Well, all right, maybe it's because that's where you're focusing your attention. So it's good to stop and ask yourself sometimes, what isn't disappointing in my life, in my job, in my career, in my lab? What's going on in your world that isn't disappointing? And I'm not talking about it's got to be everything that's so wonderful and perfect and winning and cherries on top all the time. Just I'm going to set the bar here really low. Just what isn't disappointing? I show up every day and the power is on. I show up every day, a lab is here that's outfitted and got stuff. And there are other people here. And I'm safe here. And, there can be a lot of things you could look at instead of the thing you're disappointed in and realize, it isn't that bad. When I put it all in context and realize that, well, that's just one piece of this puzzle here. And there's all these things I can do about it. And meanwhile, all these other things are going well. There's plenty of things that are not causing disappointment. And if you show some gratitude for those things, disappointment starts to be less painful to you. Another thing you can do is whenever you find yourself in a situation where you're disappointed, get some good counsel. And good counsel can come from a lot of places. Now, it may be that after something goes wrong, it's like, wow, I really don't know how to do this better. Well, go get some counsel, some advice from a mentor, someone who's been there before, someone who's walked this road. And I think many of us can find those people right in our close circles. They're there. There are people that have more experience, and there are people that are willing to help. So go to them. Or you might go, let's say you don't have a mentor for this. Well, go to a colleague, somebody else who's walking the same road as you and facing the same issues as you. And sometimes just having a powwow with somebody like that, you come up with some answers between you. And then finally, if there's nothing else to do, go to a friend. They don't have to have answers. They just have to hear that I'm disappointed, and just receiving their compassion or their empathy might be enough to carry you through it. This is the last stop along the way. Do all these other things, and you'll rarely have to do that. And I'm not saying not to tell your friends about your disappointments. I'm saying that it doesn't have to be the thing that saves you. It's always nice. It's great to go to the bar after work and have a beer and like, man, today I just fell on my face. It was ridiculous. And your bartender's like, yeah, I know how you feel, man. I've been there. Great. That emotional support is useful too. He can't help you with your problem. You're the one with the PhD. He pours beer. But it still can be helpful to you. So finally, after all this is going on, I'm like, all right, well, I've done what I can do. This thing happened. It's over. Now it's time to get back up on that horse. Don't go, well, I'm never doing that again. I'm afraid to ever try again. Like, no, you definitely have to try again. You got to keep going. And you can use it as motivation. When something goes wrong, sometimes that can be something like, oh, I'm never doing that again. I'm never having egg in my face like that again. It can cause you to step up. It can make you pay more attention. It can make you be more detail focused to make sure that you get a better result the next time. And then when you do that and you get involved again, and even before you succeed, just getting engaged again can separate you from that past disappointment. You're focused on what you're doing now, not focused on a painful outcome before. I'm focused on right now and the thing that I am deeply a part of. And that's how you can take yourself out of disappointment. So I've got to also put a link to a past episode, number 26, The Power of Gratitude, because we talked about that a bit in all of this. So I just want to make sure everybody gets that. Make sure you take a look at perfectionism as setting the bar too low, and talk to people that can help buck you up, get back on that horse, get back in the game, keep going. Disappointments will happen, but they can be very short-lived. You can accept your way out of them, and you can move forward and keep expanding your career, and you'll find you'll have less and less disappointment. So, anything you'd like to add there, Nick?
Yeah, that was really great. Thank you, Ken. And as you were speaking, I jotted down a little diagram of all of this like a biological pathway.
I like it.
It just appeared to me. For me, it's quite an interesting one. If you link it back to, this idea of disappointment causing pain, if you link it back to the previous episode about imagination, again, I think we mentioned that last week, the idea of imagination, being required for success. It would be that, the biological term would be imagination is necessary for success, but not sufficient. So imagination plus drive it's either going to give you success or failure. But if you don't have imagination or drive, you're not going to get either outcome. You just have inertia. And this is just so people know, this diagram, if it's useful for you, you can find it in the show notes. for this episode. So,
but that's really good, Nick. I really like that.
Yeah. So you've got imagination plus drive equals success or failure. Binary outcome, and the downside is failure leads to disappointment, which leads to pain, which suppresses imagination and drive. And then that's where you get people, the phenomenon of people's world getting smaller because they don't want to expose themselves to disappointment. Well, they really don't want to expose themselves to the pain of disappointment because that's what they've experienced. So they let their world get smaller and smaller and smaller. So if you can look at what Ken has said here and outlined of ways to mitigate disappointment. So there's two ways to do that, or there's 2 points that you can mitigate disappointment. One is you can stop the disappointment turning into pain. And some ways you can do that are preparation, so preparing for the outcome of disappointment and being ready to accept it in advance. The second one is accepting it when it comes. You can either do that in advance or when it happens. Treating it as learning, so diffuses the sort of pain energy rather than going into pain. It becomes a building block for your future success, or just plain old gratitude. To be like, okay, well, to kind of put that pain into context. Then that's one way to diffuse the pain. The other one is to not allow these things that amplify the pain, like perfectionism and comparison and things like that, to be part of your life, or to get rid of those if you can. Those will reduce the translation of failure into pain and stop you from having that downward spiral effect where you suppress your imagination and drive. So you go, I don't want, the whole. There's a thing in the news here in Britain just now that popped out at me, and it actually fits in quite well. And it's you can look up. I'll put the link to it in the show notes. There's a newspaper article about it. So this guy is Marcus Rashford. He's a footballer, an English footballer, and he's kind of over this pandemic, so he's become a bit of a political activist, or he's been drawn into it. But that's by the by. He's an extremely successful young man, and the quote that he from him is that whenever I hear no, I ask myself why not. And that's, if you look at that diagram, the reason you say no to something that pops up in your imagination that you could possibly do is that you're worried about disappointment and pain, or looking bad, or whatever. If you can remove that inhibition and just drive and focus on the doing, the imagination and drive part, rather than whether it's a success or failure, and keep going forward regardless of whether it's a success or a failure, that's when you get hyper sort of growth. That's when you get high levels of growth and success.
Sure. And for those of you who are very pragmatic, sometimes when you hear that question, why not, you poo-poo it, you blow it off, because you're hearing it wrong. You're hearing it as a rhetorical question. Don't ask it as a rhetorical question. Ask it as a question you intend to answer. Why not? I have to have a reason why not. That can, because the thing you think is the answer to that question is what's holding you back. And when you make it a rhetorical question, you leave it unanswered. So you don't know why you're being held back. You just, it's just sitting there.
I mean, literally, if you look at this, if the way that it's gone is for you is shown in this diagram, if you see, is explained in this diagram, is that the reason you're saying why not is because is literally because you're afraid of disappointment. That or something like that. It's going to be something like that if you examine it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we should have Nick drawn pictures during all these episodes from now on.
I love this when something pops up like a biological pathway, because I can understand those, and it's hopefully nice. People in the audience can as well. But this is quite nice.
Yeah, great. All right. Anything else you want to add then at this point, Nick?
No, I think if we can just wrap it up by again thanking you, Ken, for a great episode. It's a really important topic, and hopefully people can absorb and use it to use this to stop disappointment. Disappointment is suppressing science. So let's get rid of it, or let's deal with it. If you want to see the links to the episode and article, the podcast episode, and the article about perfectionism that Ken mentioned, you can go to the show notes, and in there you can also get my amazing diagram, of course. Then you can find the show notes at bitesizebio.com/the happy scientist. This is episode 34, how to handle disappointment. And in that page, there will be somewhere there will be a place where you can download the show notes. You can also find us, contact us, talk to us at facebook.com/the happy scientist club. And also just a reminder that if you haven't done so already, go back to episodes 1 to 9 of the podcast and listen to them. If this sort of stuff is working for you, then, or if it's ringing a bell for you, then go back and listen to those episodes 1 to 9, which talks about some foundational principles that you will find useful. So I think that brings us to the end of another episode. I can't believe we're on 34 already. But
time flies.
Okay, thanks, Ken, and thanks everyone for listening in.
Thank you.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.